So I want to comment on a recent discussion that John Vervaeke had with Jordan Hall. And it was a great discussion. And I think it's the right discussion to be had in our culture right now. I think it's sort of at this interesting cross point between religion, spirituality, and let's say science. And our culture sort of had these pieces bumping up against each other in the new atheist debates some years ago. But that was very much competitive. And what Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke are doing now is a much more cooperative dialogue between these parts. It's not which one of us can defeat the other in a debate. Maybe that's an important question, and it's been a question that was answered dialogically in our culture in a lot of debates for a while until we got over it. Well, now what we're doing is we're saying, look, who cares who can beat each other in a debate? What can we learn from each other? And maybe that's the right way to look at things because this is a part of our cultural knowledge we've developed that we have not integrated. We have not properly thought through religious and non-religious systems and tried to cross compare the best parts of them in order to generate new insights. And Vervaeke and Jordan Hall are talking in particular here about a different conception of Christianity, which could potentially live up to the transformative promise of Christianity, that it would inspire people to build the kingdom of heaven on earth. And Vervaeke makes this point at about 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 30 seconds in, roundabout there. He says that Jordan Hall is explaining a positive sum Christianity, whereas Vervaeke grew up under the paradigm of a zero sum competitive Christianity. And what Vervaeke says is that knowing Jordan Hall personally, he knows that Jordan Hall has spent so much of his life trying to escape the zero sum competitive games that keep us from achieving our social and individual potential. And the way Jordan Hall characterizes this is that it's all about going from competitive zero sum games with winners and losers and finding a way to switch over to positive sum games with winners and winners. And he characterizes the distance between these as something like rivalry. And that going from win lose to win win requires some sort of anti rivalrous inspiration, which he finds in Christ, and in particular in the image of the crucifixion of Christ. He says, you look at that, it is a limit story. It's the most extreme story, in some sense, you can tell, that expresses the idea of anti-rivalry. That, he emphasizes the importance of imagining the actual moment, the actual event of the crucifixion, and not just a symbol of it, but actually imagining standing there, being there, like, for example, John the Apostle was. And he made me think about the crucifixion in a different way, because when he says imagining being there and imagining experiencing and observing the outpouring of love coming from Christ. And I would have thought of the contemplation of the crucifixion in particular as a sort of darker sort of confrontation with the depths of life's burdens. This is a little bit more reminiscent of the way that the character in True Detective contemplates the cross, not even as a Christian, but just as somebody contemplating, voluntarily confronting pain and suffering and death. And that can be inspiring and growthful in ways, but it's darker than what Jordan Hall talks about here, because he's saying, look, he uses this terminology. He says, on the cross, Christ perceived the kingdom of heaven to be at hand, right? Which is something he taught. He said, don't listen to anybody who says the kingdom of heaven is here or there. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is at least partially, where you are already, anywhere in time or space, no matter how good or bad things are, it's all the kingdom of heaven if you can see it with the eyes of heaven, if you can see it from the perspective of God the Father, which, of course, the understanding is that Christ did that. And so experienced the kingdom of heaven all the time and was teaching other people how to do it. But that his experience was of peace, joy, love, even up on the cross. And I thought of it in a different way then, to imagine looking up at Jesus on the cross and being like, he's doing okay though. Like, it's one thing to focus on the immensity of the suffering. It's another thing to realize, except maybe at the very end when he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He was able to maintain connection to that peace, joy, and love, even on the cross. And so it's not so much of a depressing symbol anymore. It's like, yes, on the outside, this looks like a really dark moment, but to understand that the person experiencing the worst part of that is actually okay. It's like, well, maybe I can face what will probably be a much easier death when the time comes, and I could be okay. Maybe I could face other trials of life, other burdens, pains, sufferings, losses, sorrows, and maybe I could be somehow okay through them all. And that contemplation of the crucifixion is much more hopeful in some sense and inspiring, even if you imagine somebody selfish looking at the cross, being like, look, this isn't just about telling you that this is nobler than your selfishness. Look how unselfish and amazing this person is. You should be more like that. And you're so far from that. You're among the worst. It's like, well, that's not a very inspiring message, at least from their perspective. But now imagine telling them all of your burdens and pains. Look, he can go through this and he's not actually suffering horribly. Wouldn't you like to know how to do something like that? And so Jordan Hall also emphasizes that this is, as well as being personally inspiring and potentially redemptive and transformative, this is the path out of our win lose competition structures and our path to win win cooperative structures. I had a friend who was writing a whole book on this idea that basically the great enemy in the world is our inability to cooperate. It's the cooperation problem, because one way to express the cooperation problem is to point out what we could do if we solved the cooperation problem. Because if we just cooperated with each other and we devoted the resources we have and the abilities we had to cooperating with each other and helping everyone get what they want, basically all of our problems would be over instantly. If everybody could be trusted not to do harmful things to each other, our efficiency would immediately go through the roof. And if everybody were willing to help the next person out and know that if they ran out of resources or started to come up against problems while helping, that somebody else would help them out. And so they have no need to hold back resources. They can just give and know that people will receive in wisdom and efficacy. And if we could just cooperate like that, we would solve pretty much all of our problems instantly. And that's what a big deal it is that we haven't solved the cooperation problem. And so we're always in these competitions, these win-lose situations with each other. And it slows us down so much. At its core, it's the cooperation problem, which is keeping us from solving every single problem you can think about. And so the idea of a Christianity which says the power of our symbol is in inspiring you not to be so rivalrous and competitive. And he talks about, and Vervaeke comments on this experience he has contemplating the cross. And churches and groups gather to do this together. And so if you imagine people all contemplating that image and its meaning and its inspiration, the lives they could live, the freedom from suffering and pain and fear of death, and the obstacle being this rivalrous instinct within us. And you experience that together, and then you look at each other and you look at each other differently. And you say, I don't want my next dollar to come at your expense. I don't want there to be a loser at the other side of my victory. And I feel like you feel the same way looking back at me, and all of us who've contemplated this together have sort of devoted ourselves and renewed our commitment to this principle that ultimately leads to cooperation and positive sum games, which could ultimately, if we all did simply that one thing, that would be the end of pretty much all of our problems. And so Jordan Hall, he expresses this idea that as we look and contemplate this scene, the crucifixion, it's like our human natures, our somewhat more animal or instinctive natures, are being voluntarily crucified in the same way that Christ voluntarily mounted the cross, walked toward the pain and the suffering and the death. And as we watch him do that and imitate him doing that, we become more cooperative as a group, and we become united rather than divided in competition. And Jordan calls this reconciling, because he makes an interesting point here, which is that he claims that this cooperative substrate, the recognition of our underlying unity, is more fundamental than the cooperative substrate, the competitive substrate, the hierarchies. He says, in fact, that those hierarchies are constructed out of the substrate, which is ultimately unified and cooperative. And so Christ is a transformative image and figure that helps people realize that they are already made, in some sense, out of this cooperative fabric. We are all already one in some sense, and that if we simply recognize that, we can act it out and balance out the negative side effects of our competitive hierarchies. And I would say that the observation of Christ in this example, it's significantly about inspiring something like our sub-personalities to be willing to let go of what they perceive to be, imminently acquirable utility, you know? And if you think of all the vices and you say, look, all of these are vices in the sense that when they think they can get what they want and the circumstances are right or wrong, as you want to think about it, they will sacrifice everybody else and go for what they want. This is inefficient to have all of these competitive subpersonalities running against you. Imagine a different system where everybody, when commanded by an accepted higher authority, was willing not to take the marshmallow right in front of them. Even though it's right there and they know they could have it, they're willing to be commanded. And in exchange, they get to live as cooperative participants in a symphony of existence that is far richer and more generally successful. And they'll get much farther toward what they want as individuals, even working as a group, than if they go at it alone and have to fight and poll against competitors within the ecosystem to get what they want. And so it's a good deal in an absolute sense of them getting what they want and there being more utility, more value. But it's the cost, the reason it doesn't just happen all the time and it's sometimes difficult is, well, I may do better, but my brother may do even better than I'm doing better. So I can lose relative position despite my absolute gain. And how much I value placement in the hierarchy as opposed to health of the cooperative non-hierarchy will something like certainly it will touch on how interested I am in cutting this deal. I referring to any subpersonality or a full personality within a society or a group. But my attraction to cutting that deal is going to be partially driven by my relative valuation of my hierarchical versus non hierarchical value status and how much I have to gain by sacrificing individual selfish needs, cooperating together, and having every part participate in the success of the other, each in its turn. And Vervaeke seems to have a somewhat similar sense of things because as Jordan Hall is talking about human nature being voluntarily crucified to generate a sort of divine coupling, a coupling up, a generation of a dialogue with the divine, with something outside in some sense. Vervaeke says that that take is sort of like a koan, a Zen koan designed to alter states of consciousness by breaking down the conceptual grips and interpretive lenses that we impose upon raw information and sensory data before we experience it, shaped by our self. And Vervaeke says that Jordan Hall's use of the image of the crucifixion, it's not so much about getting cognitive content out of it. It's about exploding or breaking down the grammars that we automatically try to project on everything. And those grammars are the concepts that the Buddhist paradigm would say that we delude ourselves into granting a sense of reality, but we're using them ultimately to shape experience before we observe it. And they're all about getting rid of that, exploding those grammars, having a direct experience, getting rid of the apparent division between inner and outer, and realizing the oneness. And Vervaeke is basically saying, you're using Christ in the crucifixion to achieve a similar sense of oneness, a similar breaking down of conceptual barriers between you and your experience. And then this is what Jordan calls the reconciliation. It's not completely about transforming us into something completely different. It's about redeeming us. It's about keeping our essential nature, but then harmonizing it with its original source, reconciling it. This idea that our hierarchical assessments, valuations, and participations are ultimately made out of, are woven out of the underlying cooperative fabric of our deep fundamental unity. And so this is a type of Christianity which you can see potentially doing, avoiding the mistakes that traditional historical Christianity has committed and the sins that modern Christianity is committing. But maybe this is a vision of Christianity which, one, is better, is more true to the aspiration of Christianity, and two, is more universal, you know, because one, it appreciates others. You can see that this flavor of positive sum Christianity, this appreciation for the underlying unity, the oneness, the connection, it would make Christians much more positively disposed towards non-Christians, but also the other way around, because non-Christians have so much to learn from this idea, this positive sum relationship with each other. And if in the juxtaposition of Christian thought and, let's say, scientific or more intellectual thought, sort of look at Vervaeke as a perfect example of this. And I'd love to talk with him or Jordan about basically this exact subject, because I think this is the conversation we need to be having. And if to some degree Jordan came to this version of Christianity by comparing traditional ideas to more modern scientific conceptual paradigms, and Vervaeke is sort of doing the same thing from the opposite side, coming from the more scientific paradigm, but genuinely, openly perusing Christianity for the best of what it has to offer and other traditions, and taking all the best pieces and trying to get further than any system prior. I think this is where there's low hanging fruit. This is where the work hasn't been done because nobody who took Christianity super seriously in the past, maybe they didn't have certain tools that have only been invented in modern times, but also maybe they wouldn't have taken other religions too seriously. They wouldn't have taken philosophies that denied Christianity too seriously, precisely because they took their own religion so seriously. And likewise with anybody, any other adherent of any other religion. And then we had a time in culture not very long ago where the atheists sort of went toe to toe with the religionists in debate and mostly won. Culture has more or less deemed. But they didn't take a religion seriously, which theoretically left them open to re-examine all the religions in a way that had never been done before. But that wasn't their inclination. Their inclination was to find the worst bits in the religion that were the easiest points you could point out in a debate to show that the religion couldn't be true as a whole. And because the standard claim from religions is that they are the truest thing around, that's sufficient to sort of disprove them entirely. And that's sufficient, as far as most atheists were concerned, to dismiss all of the religious productions, their thoughts, and their knowledge. And so that was a missed opportunity to synthesize the best insights from each religion and or philosophy. And now we're at the step beyond that, and now we're really doing it. And people like Vervaeke are really doing it. And it's this point in history where maybe we're not a dogmatic adherent of any particular religion. And so we don't have to avoid taking other religions too seriously. And on the other hand, we're not devoted to dismissing everything about religions, even if we see flaws in them. We're genuinely looking for all the good that they have to offer and hoping to find good. And even sometimes, straining and narrowing our eyes and really trying to find good where it can be found, even if it's mixed in with other things, in the sort of less competitive, more cooperative faith that in the genuinely open and fair assessment of all the various philosophical takes on things, we may find among them the clues necessary to construct a sort of meta system that does what all the others have tried to do, but does it better. That is not a competitor, not really here to replace or even act as a substitute for these systems, but rather functions as a sort of redeeming or enhancing extra layer that says whatever your system, whatever you believe in wants to do, we have scoured the earth for every insight every other system can give to help you do that. So, you're while you're practicing and finding connection with God, or if it's not religious, if you're coming to terms with your place in the universe, why not look at the version of your system or tradition that has been, adorned and clarified with all the other insights that other traditions have created. And if you perceive that you get more of what your religion or system offers by combining it with what you can learn from others, maybe you want to learn about others too. And there's a whole extra layer of learning that goes beyond that. But if you want, you can just get the most out of your own system: better, faster, more efficient, clearer understanding. And so, if there's some sort of unifying spirit that we can all try to embody and build into our structures, maybe that spirit looks like something which looks for all the best in every other spirit and includes it and learns from it and appreciates it for what it has to offer. And although every other system might also have flaws, none of those have to impede all of the positive and cooperative things. I've just mentioned. And then maybe it combines all of those things into a positive, harmonious participation. And while many ideas, memes, or spirits might get by being sticky, clingy, compulsory on some level, maybe the ultimate winning meme is one that competes by not doing that, by refusing to compel, by awaiting positive action from others to generate, let's call them the necessary dialogues, and ultimately brings together all the best in everything, is a competitor to nothing, is friend to everything, non-compulsive, unifying, empowering, and the word Jordan emphasizes so much here is wholesome. That's sort of the idea of this spirit. It has the term wholesome because the whole point of it is that it learns from every part of the whole. Nobody is neglected. If wholesomeness wins, that might not be your complete and utter victory, depending on your particular values, but it's not your complete and utter defeat either, because you know that part of wholesomeness has a place for you. So maybe it's not really who you want to win if you get to crown yourself king, if that's your choice, but you could lose to a worse opponent. And so that is another reason this spirit might be capable of bringing together disparate perspectives, values, hierarchies, and bringing out the best in all of them. And it might be the key to, it might be that's hard to discover narrow path that once followed can be followed more or less continually and doesn't leave anything out, because that's the whole point. That's why it is so competitive in the mimetic landscape. It's theoretically the winner in the mimetic landscape precisely because of how it cooperates in a positive sum way with the other memes that think of themselves in competition with it. Well, it doesn't think it's in competition with them. It thinks that we're all cooperating together. So Jordan, Hall, and John Vervaeke discussing a version of Christianity and a version of how you conceptualize reality that may hold the insights missing from our cultural discussion to answer the questions that have so far been unanswered by our best analyses in every system, religious, non-religious, philosophical, etc. That which still has not been answered. Well, they're trying to answer it, and they're having amazing conversations. So that's my commentary on that, and I'll wrap it up there.